I just think that for a lot of these things that are touted, the upside is not that huge and the downside is unknown, right? We don't really know like what
I think
shady,
especially with like gene therapy.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
That's a clear case where there's just no long-term data.
Yeah,
No idea.
So it's like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, I've also talked to patients whose parents are in the final stages of Alzheimer's disease and they're looking for a Hail Mary. Well, you know what? My risk appetite changes a lot, right? And they found some guy in Costa Rica who's got this stem cell therapy and they don't care about how much it's going to cost. They don't care that this guy's going to charge them $60,000 because honestly, like their dad is so demented at this point that, and I sort of say, look, I want to prepare you for the fact that I think this will have no effect. But if you will have a greater regret when your father is dead that you had $60,000 that you didn't give a Hail Mary to, then you should probably do it. But those are very different questions.
And very sort of extreme. That's an extreme case, right? I mean,
it is, but I get that, believe it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I get a lot of that as well.
Yeah. I think stem cells are a place particularly where I struggle a little bit even to know where I land, because I think the preclinical and to some extent clinical data that's available, I think clearly there are use cases where stem cells really, really beneficial, right? And may even, if done properly, slow the aging process. And yet there are a bunch of these clinics out there operating where I have no clue, like what are they actually doing? And
yeah, this is a bit of a regulatory disaster.
Yeah.
And I suspect the reason is that the FDA can't or doesn't want to open up the Pandora's box because it would not be difficult to identify a particular indication for stem cells.
Yeah.
But if stem cells receive an approval for indication X, the way the FDA works is now you can use it for anything and everything.
Yeah.
And so I believe that's why the FDA is not approving stem cells for even the narrowest indication where you could at the very least do the experiment. Like it would really be interesting to know if you have a torn rotator cuff, if an injection of stem cells into that torn rotator cuff would produce a better response than letting it heal on its own and or doing surgery. That's quite testable. The most challenging thing is understanding the protocol, because that's the problem with all cell-based therapies is the how do you make it is part of the drug. But again, I think that their view is, oh, well, if we open the door to that, I mean, forget about it.
It's interesting. I'd never thought about it from that angle before. So that's an interesting hypothesis as to why.
I think it's the same with the whole peptide space as well.
Yeah.
Right. So the FDA has put the kibosh on peptides. The FDA has put the
How are peptides any different from any other small molecule, right? In the sense that you know specifically what the peptide is. You can do manufacturing
I think their view is just that like, well, it's an interesting question, right? Do they think that, like, let's take the two ones that people that talk about the most, right? People talk about BPC 157 and CJC 1296. Those are the two that I certainly get asked about the most.
Yeah.
I think decent. It's not implausible that those things have efficacy in certain situations.
Right. Have you used either one of them?
No. But I've had patients use them both.
Sure.
Prior to the FDA sort of banning them, when you could actually buy them in the US from credible sources, like when you could go to a really good compounding pharmacy, they could give you a COA.
Yeah. Is it actually banned?
They cannot be sold outside of research purposes.
Oh, interesting.
So what that means is, at least this was true in September 2023, this was the ruling.
Wow.
I assume it's still the case.
Check it out. Yeah, that's interesting.
So basically you can sell them for research purposes and you can buy them for research purposes. So there's a lot of wink wink going on. Like sites are selling them and you can buy them, but you have to, you're buying them for research. They're selling them for research. The problem is like nobody's checking what they are.
So there's a purity, which, I think the same thing could be true for stem cells because there's a lack of quality control.
Yeah. So that's my point. It's like, I just wish that I would prefer to do this stuff in bright light.
Yeah, no, I agree completely.
To shade.
Yeah, I'd never thought about the FDA Pandora's box sort of idea before, but I think the fact that they haven't played any real significant role, especially with stem cells, has led to a situation where people are doing this and people are, there's a small number who come back with miraculous stories. We don't know how many people didn't have miraculous outcomes. And we don't have any information on like what was actually done, what was injected. There's no data that we can actually look at to use to answer the question you asked, which is this therapy actually beneficial for a given indication? That's totally knowable. We should know that by now. But I think the fact that the FDA hasn't played any role here in regulating has led to the lack of data actually coming to light.
I would be highly doubtful that systemic stem cells would do much of anything. So in other words, this idea of just getting an IV infusion of stem cells, I'm calling that placebo effect coupled with some local transient, effect of whatever's being infused. But I just have a real hard time believing that those stem cells are not getting sequestered in the lung and, being chomped up by macrophages or whatever. Like I have a hard time believing that. Where I think, and what I would want to see tested is kind of the local use of stem cells.
Yeah.
So, stem cells at, facet joints or discs or, torn muscles, things like that. I think that would be interesting.